And when I fall, you tied a rope to me. You're blessing me every day. I was down with an illusion, like a sparrow with broken wings. But now I shine with your reflection on me. I'm getting back up on my feet. That you showed up was written in the palm. You are a statement, explode like a bomb. I get to push myself to victory. You make me winner. You cut me loose and set me free. You make me win in every way. You showed me how to spread my wings. Yes, I'm the winner of the day. You cut me loose and set.
All right, we're live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual chat program. I'm very excited today because today we have our wonderful speaker, Naomi Messer. Hi, Naomi.
Hi.
And we have our wonderful American Center Karshi. Rahatoy Safarova, American Center Karshi Tashkent director, is here with great people from ACQ. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so today we will be speaking about American basketball, right? So as usual, I want to remind everyone, we are live on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you guys have questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the comment section, and Naomi will be answering them after the presentation. We want to make it as interactive as possible. Yeah, so Rahatoipa, do you have anything to tell?
I just want to say we are very excited for the next presentation made by Naomi Messer, because every time we learn something. This time we are excited to learn about basketball. As for the history, I think it started from 1891, right? The basketball was invented, yes, and we would like to know more about basketball, as for me, especially about a female basketball team, because we don't know that much. And at the end, we will ask questions. Naomi, we're looking forward for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, without further ado, we can begin. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So today, as you can tell by the presentation, I'm going to be talking to you all about basketball, which is the second most popular sport in America after American football. Around 11% of Americans say that it's their favorite sport. However, it is the most played sport in America, with more than 30 million people playing this sport every year, usually in informal games, which are also called pickup games. So if you were to go to a park pretty much any day of the weekend in any American city, you would be able to see people playing basketball with each other. And this talk is titled How Americans Relax, because so many Americans play or watch basketball in their spare time. And it's probably my favorite sport to watch, although I would say that I'm more of a casual viewer. Today we will be discussing the history of basketball as well as some of the rules, and I'm going to give an overview of some of the famous players, and also discuss the most recent season of basketball and some of the things that occurred. Hopefully, in watching this talk, you should get a better understanding of how basketball fits into American culture and how to better appreciate basketball. So if you are watching a game or playing a game, you have a little bit more understanding. So to start off with the history of basketball, as Rahatoy just said, it was started in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1891 by James Naismith, and he was a professor of physical education at the YMCA training school, which was located in Springfield. YMCA is a very popular non-for-profit institution in the United States. They have one in almost every major city, and it just pretty much is dedicated to physical fitness, gyms, and stuff like that. And so they own if you were to want to join a low-cost gym, a YMCA would be a good way to do that. They also have camps during the summer, stuff like that. And James Naismith was looking to create a fun and engaging sport which could keep people fit indoors. For those of you who don't know, winters in New England are extremely cold and the days are very short and tiring. And so it makes it very hard to remain physically fit. And he was looking for a way to combat this and to come up with an indoor sport that would also be really fun. And so he decided to take a ball and to have the goal of the game be to get it through the peach basket, which you can see here. But as you can see in this picture, in the initial games of basketball, the peach basket still had the bottom intact, which made it really laborious and difficult because you had to go in and scoop out the ball from the basket when you were done. The goals and rules of the game were pretty similar to the basketball we know today. The objective was to move the ball around by passing it to your teammates or by running and dribbling, with the aim of getting the ball into the net or the basket. And the game was initially played with teams of 10 people, but that doesn't seem to have been very successful because in the first official basketball game, which was played in Albany, New York, with the 2 teams of 10, ended in a score of 1-0. And just to give you a sense of how bad that outcome is, it's not uncommon today for teams to score more than 100 points. So it was not very effective to have so many people on the court. And it quickly spread throughout the YMCA system. So people in gyms all across the United States and Canada were playing basketball, and it became pretty popular. And soon it also became a popular college and high school sport. And in 1895, the first college game was played. Professional basketball began in some form in the United States in the 1920s, but it wasn't until the 1940s, with the creation of national basketball governing bodies, that basketball became a major professional sport. And in 1949, the National Basketball Association was created. You can see their logo in the center here. And it is the only American league for basketball today. Everybody who plays professional basketball in the United States is in some ways affiliated with the NBA, and they regulate the teams and come up with the rules. And it's not just American. There's also one Canadian team, although there used to be 2 Canadian teams, the Toronto Raptors. The WNBA, which is the professional league for women, was created much later in 1996, and they currently have teams in almost every single major market. As I was discussing in my female athletes presentation a couple of weeks back, there are a number of pretty famous WNBA players, including Diana Taurasi and Candace Parker. And if you decided to visit Springfield, Massachusetts today, which is not very far from where I go to school in New Haven, you can visit the Basketball Hall of Fame and learn more about the history of basketball. Also, as with many other halls of fame, the most famous and successful players get inducted, so you can learn more about the players that made basketball great. So before we go further, I think we should probably talk a little bit about the basics of basketball. So if you're watching or playing, you can sort of understand what's going on. As I discussed previously, the basic contours of Naismith's game remain. The goal is for teams, now comprised of 5, to get the ball into the basket. Players run around the court, dribbling the ball as they move from place to place to increase the difficulty of the game. You know, it wouldn't be so difficult if you're just sort of carrying the ball and running around. It's a lot harder if you're dribbling and multitasking. The ball is passed from teammate to teammate to move it around the court. Generally, each basket is worth 2 points, but there are certain circumstances in which the basket may be worth 3 points. For instance, if it is shot outside of the 3-point arc, which you can see on this picture far to the right, it's this arc in the lighter color. So Steph Curry, who you all might have heard of, is best known for threes, and his strategy of shooting a lot of 3 points has revolutionized the game of basketball, and now a lot of teams try to shoot 3 points, and it's a fairly common strategy as a way to win. And if players break the rule of basketball, that is sometimes called committing a foul. Different fouls carry different punishments. If you were going to shoot and then you get fouled, you could be awarded 2 or 3 free throws. And so you would shoot from the free throw line and shoot the ball without any interference. So you'd sort of stand in the center, not very far from the basket, with the other players lined up around you, and you would shoot the ball. And this might seem a lot easier than shooting against other players, but it's actually a really difficult element of the game for many players, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who we're going to be discussing later, and who is Finals MVP this year, because it's really difficult for a lot of the players when the game stops. You get into your own head and the pressure is on you to make the basket. It can be really difficult. So some potential fouls include hitting, holding, or pushing. As a result, the game of basketball is much less violent than some other sports like American football or hockey. There are rarely any fights, and if there are, people easily get ejected from the game or could have to sit out a whole season if it's particularly violent. After a foul, the ball turns over to the other team. So at the end of the game, there's a pretty common strategy where the team that's losing, maybe by a couple of points, will try to foul the team that's ahead so that they can get the ball back and hopefully score some points. The assumption being that, they're not going to make every free throw, and if you get the basket, you could do a lot more. In the NBA, the game is comprised of 4 12-minute quarters, but despite that, it still takes around 2.5 hours for a full game of basketball to be played. That includes a lot of commercial breaks and time stopped to determine if things are fouls, stuff like that. Simply put, the team that wins the game is the one that has the best defense and offense. Defensive players can jump up and block shots and prevent baskets from going in, whereas offensive players are able to drive to the basket and get buckets or points. One of the most common offensive moves, which you can see here on the left, is called a pick and roll. It's when a player blocks a defender and moves towards the basket to receive a pass and hopefully score a point. It's often successful because the defender has to decide whether he's going to guard the player with the ball or guard the player who is blocking him. In general, defense is done man-to-man, meaning that each player guards someone on the opposing team, which you can see in the center. And so now I'm going to discuss 3 of the most famous basketball players playing today. Probably you've heard of most of them: LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. There are, of course, plenty more famous basketball players today who I'm not mentioning, as well as plenty of retired players who you might have heard about, like Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, or Hakeem Olajuwon. But in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on these 3. So first up is LeBron James. I'm sure you have all heard about LeBron James, who is the most famous basketball player alive today, if not one of the most famous Americans. He was born in Akron, Ohio in 1984 to a 16-year-old mother. And even early on, his immense skill at basketball was apparent. After his sophomore year of high school, he was featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated magazine, which is a very popular magazine. And they were describing how he was a fantastic basketball player and maybe one of the best. In fact, he became so popular that during his senior year of high school, his games were broadcast on ESPN and other national TV channels. These were just high school games. And he decided to declare for the draft after graduating from high school in 2003, meaning he let the NBA teams know that he was intending or hoping to play basketball in the upcoming season. And then the teams will then decide if they want you. It's a pretty big deal, and it happens right after the championship. He was the number 1 pick, which means that he was the best player that year, and he was selected by his hometown team of the Cleveland Cavaliers. In his rookie season, he was named Rookie of the Year, and he was also the 3rd rookie ever to average 20 points per game and 5 rebounds and assists. These are incredibly good statistics. Even many players in the best parts of their careers can't get these numbers. And he did it in his first season. So as you can tell, he's an exceptional basketball player. And he continued to play very well, becoming an all-star in his 2nd season. An all-star is the distinction given to players who are considered to be the best, voted by fans, players, coaches, and the media. And his skills continued to be praised in his early years, with many commentators describing his performance as among the best they had seen. And despite leading Cleveland to the playoffs for the first time in 6 years, they were not able to win the national championship. In 2009 and 2010, James continued to be lauded by the basketball establishment with his win of the Most Valuable Player award, given to the player seen as being the most successful or the most valuable that season. In 2010, LeBron James decided not to sign again with Cleveland, and he decided that he was interested in playing for another team, which was he most likely spurred by the inability of the Cleveland Cavaliers to make it past the playoffs into a championship. And he ultimately decided to play in Miami with two other excellent players, Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. However, this decision was widely reviled. I remember even hearing on the news that people would burn jerseys in Cleveland and people were really upset and angry at him. And people in Cleveland were especially upset because it's not a particularly large or affluent city. It's what's called sort of more of a small market for basketball. There are only so many people who live there and only so many people who watch the game. And people felt that LeBron put them on the map, and they were therefore extremely upset when he left Cleveland for a larger and more vibrant city, which I think some Cleveland residents felt was similar to the way that Cleveland had been previously overlooked, and how some of their, best students or best people in the city had gone elsewhere. And this decision to move to Miami and play alongside two other excellent players was also looked down upon by some older players like Michael Jordan, people who had retired, who had this mentality that joining super teams, which I'm going to discuss a lot today, with other talented players was a cheap way to win championships, and it was better to use your own leadership skill and talent to take the team that initially drafted you and win. Nevertheless, LeBron's strategy was successful. After a shaky initial 2010-2011 season, he proceeded to win back-to-back tournaments in 2012 and 2013 with the Miami Heat. And in 2014, after 4 years with the Heat, he returned again for the Cavaliers, perhaps hoping to repair ties with the city who had hated him. He successfully did so, not at least in part that this time, Cleveland had traded and gotten him a roster of excellent players, including Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. He won Cleveland's first championship in 2016, and in doing so, he ended a 52-year drought for Cleveland, who had not won any professional sports championships in more than half a century. This championship included one of LeBron's most famous plays, one of which is called the block, which you can see on the right, where in Game 7, so basketball games in the playoffs are played out of 7 games. In the last game of the series, he blocked a shot and made sure that the game remained tied, and therefore the Cavaliers were able to win over the Golden State Warriors. It's a really cool shot. I would strongly suggest looking it up on YouTube. In 2018, LeBron James left Cleveland again, this time for the Los Angeles Lakers, although when he left, relationship between him and Cleveland was much better after winning them a championship. He won a championship with the Lakers in 2020, winning inside the NBA bubble that had been set up so that games could continue during quarantine. In 2020, the season was stopped short in the middle as a result of the coronavirus and an early outbreak in the NBA. Later, in order to continue playing during the summer, the NBA picked, I think, 19 of the best teams, brought them all down to Florida, and had them play inside the bubble. So all of the players weren't really interacting with the outside world. They were expected to remain within the bubble, get tested regularly, but they could continue playing. And this year, the 2020 to 2021 season, the Lakers lost in the first round of the playoffs, which was a tremendous blow to LeBron's ego and an outcome many were shocked by. For the upcoming season, the Lakers traded many of their best players to bring Russell Westbrook, who you can see right in the center, player number 0, to the Lakers, and Carmelo Anthony, in the hopes that they can guarantee a win for LeBron, who's getting a bit older and who's 36 and likely to retire soon. Both of those players, Carmelo Anthony and Russell Westbrook, have never won a championship, so they have a lot to lose, and they really want to win. Outside of basketball, LeBron James is known for his philanthropy. He opened up charter schools in Ohio, where he's from, to try to, I think they're called Promise Academy, to try to get students more involved in school. He also acts. He was recently in the movie Space Jam, if anyone saw it. And he's often discussed as being the greatest player of all time, either him or Michael Jordan, which is a hot debate amongst diehard basketball fans. So the next player we're going to talk about is Kevin Durant. He was born in the Washington, D.C. area in Maryland in 1988 to a single mother in a pretty tough economic situation. He has discussed how his mother often had to work 2 jobs to put food on the table, and how he feels that he sacrificed everything so her sons could eat, including sometimes going hungry at night. Kevin Durant is known for really loving his mother. When he became MVP, he gave a big shout out to his mother, who he feels made everything possible for him. And he's known for being extremely tall, with a wingspan of more than 7 feet. So if you measure from one tip of his arms to the other, it's around 7 feet long. And he claims to be 6'10", although he's probably also around 6 feet tall. He sort of has like an inside joke where he lies about his height, so it's not really clear how tall he is. Much like LeBron, in high school, he was already really well known and regarded and seen as a top NBA prospect. And he played for 1 year at University of Texas before declaring that he was going to go out for the draft. And he was drafted second in the 2007 draft to the Seattle Supersonics. And after his first rookie year, the Seattle Supersonics moved to Oklahoma City in 2008. And by the conclusion of the 2008-2009 season, he was averaging a score of around 25 points per game, which is pretty substantial. And he was playing alongside Russell Westbrook, who was drafted in 2008, and together they were. Russell Westbrook is also a very good player, and they were racking up a lot of scoring and really taking OKC to another level. During his second season in the NBA, he was selected to his first NBA All-Star team. And in 2010 to 2011, he led the NBA in scoring and averaged 27 points per game, which is pretty substantial. And in the 2013 to 2014 season, he averaged 35.9 points per game, and he scored 30 or more points in 12 straight games and became MVP that year. And that's where he gives a really beautiful speech where he talks about everything that his mother gave up for him, and how much he loves her. Despite this, and despite getting pretty far in the playoffs with Russell Westbrook, as I mentioned, is another excellent player, he was not able to get very far and was not able to win a championship. After 9 years, he decided to leave Oklahoma City to go to the Golden State Warriors. And much as with LeBron, there was a pretty considerable amount of outcry. The Golden State Warriors, he started there in 2016, and during that time, they had already won championships. Steph Curry was on their team, as was Draymond Green, and they were seen as probably one of the best teams in the NBA. And again, people became upset with this notion of super teams, that the best players in the league were all going to team up and try to take over and win all of the games, and nobody else would have any ability to do anything. The other tension that was present in his move is that there is a lot of tension between teams that are not tension necessarily, but there's big market and small market teams in the NBA. So a big market team would be a team that's located in a major American city, whereas a little market team would be something like Oklahoma City, where there aren't as many people around. But in some cases, they feel more fervently about basketball. Oklahoma City is a huge basketball city. And so people felt that in this move, he was saying that little market, that players are not going to want to go to little market cities, and they're always going to want to end up in big cities like, the Bay Area and stuff like that. However, despite all this, much like LeBron James, his move to the Golden State Warriors was really successful. They won championships in the 2016 to 2017 season and the 2017 to 2018 season. And he was the top scorer in every game during the finals of the 2016 to 2017 season. He averaged 35 points, which is very substantial. And he was subsequently named the NBA Finals MVP, which I think he was named twice for the 2 championships he won. In his last season with the Warriors in 2018 to 2019, he suffered a terrible Achilles tendon injury, which is often something that would tremendously impact your career. He still plays, but he ultimately decided to leave the Golden State Warriors, which was a decision that was met with tremendous outcry by those who live there and people who are on the team with him. In 2019, he decided to go play with the Nets, as you can see in the center. That's him in his jersey. And he decided to join his friend Kyrie Irving in New York for the 2020 to and for the 2020 to 2021 season. They added James Harden, who is another excellent player and who spent many years on the Houston Rockets and was pretty famous at that point. There was another outcry for the and charges of trying to create a super team and trying to sweep. And for New Yorkers, there is another outcry that people had, that these players were deciding to go to the Nets. For New Yorkers, our team is the Knicks, who are widely beloved, but are very frequently a very bad team. And people love the Knicks so much that this year they made it to the first round of playoffs in, I think, like 20 years. And people were celebrating in the streets after the games like they had won the championship. And so people in New York, I think, felt that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden all should have been at the Knicks. But instead they decided to go to the Nets. So off the court, he is interested in technology, and he has a number of media and business ventures. He also opened up a center for students in the DMV, which is like the greater DC area, so that they can come and learn and focus on their education as well. So the next player we're talking about is Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is also known as the Greek Freak. He was born in Athens in 1994 to a family of Nigerian emigres. And for the first few years of his life, he was actually stateless, because unlike in America, where when you're born here, you're automatically a citizen, when you're born in Greece, you still need to apply for citizenship. And he finally got his citizenship in 2013, and his Nigerian citizenship in 2015. And the country of Greece has really rallied around him, and I think they love him a lot. And there are murals in Athens where he used to play that are dedicated to him. So he started playing basketball pretty late, at around age 13. Someone like Kevin Durant started playing when he was 5 or 6 years old while his mother was at work. So he had been playing basketball pretty much for his whole life since he can walk. Started playing in a recreational league against the best players. But Giannis only starting out at 13 means that he has a lot less experience than most of the other players. And the story goes that he was playing soccer one day, as you can see in the middle. He's European, so he's a big soccer fan. And a scout came by and suggested that with his build, he would be better at playing basketball. So in 2011, just 4 years after he began to play, he started playing for a Greek team, and he played fairly well and was so beloved by fans that he was allowed to play in an all-star game, not because he was named one of the best players, but because it was supposed to be a special treat for the fans. In 2013, he became eligible for the NBA draft, or he declared for the NBA draft, and he was drafted 15th by the Milwaukee Bucks. And in his first year, there's a story that was going around very recently that he would send all of his money back to Greece to his family. He would order a cab to take him to the Western Union, which is where you go and give your money. And he sent back all of his money such that he didn't have fare for a cab home. And it was right before a game was supposed to happen. And so he was running back. He didn't have a winter jacket, and a Bucks fan saw him, picked him up in her car, and drove him to the stadium so he could play the game. So that's sort of an example of the sort of person Giannis is and how beloved he is by the city of Milwaukee. In the 2015 to 2016 season, he got his first triple-double, which is really difficult. It's when you get double stats in scoring, assists, and rebounds. In 2017, he was named an All-Star for the first time, and he continued to play exceptionally well, and I think was named the All-Star MVP. At the start of the 2017-2018 season, he scored 175 points in 5 games, which is very substantial. He was a boon to the Bucks. He also grew a lot physically during these early years with the Bucks. He gained a lot of weight and became much taller, reaching 6'10". And in 2018, he became the league's most valuable player for the first time after leading the Bucks to victory with really large margins. That year, they also made it pretty deep into the playoffs before losing to the Toronto Raptors, who ended up winning. And in 2020, during the bubble season, he was named the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year simultaneously. Again, his team made it to the second round of playoffs, but they lost to the Heat after Giannis suffered an ankle injury. The Bucks and Giannis won the championship the most recent season. As I will discuss, teams were beset by injuries, such as the Nets, who were considered to be the favorites to win, especially on the East Coast. But but Kyrie Irving and James Harden both had injuries, and Durant was playing on his own, and therefore was not able to overcome Giannis and the Bucks. During the Eastern Conference Finals playing against Atlanta, Giannis hyperextended his knee and was not able to play for the rest of the series, but he came back to play in the finals despite the injury and actually looked better than ever and was playing so well that you never would have guessed that anything had gone wrong. He averaged more than 35 points during the final series against the Sun, and I was watching it on TV, and he was hailed as the future of basketball. He became the finals MVP, and in doing so, in his press conference, he said that he was doing it the right way, meaning that he was winning with the team that he had been drafted by and working to make them better, which was seen as a rebuke to the super team. But of course, that was not really. Some people said that was not completely accurate because he had really good players on his team, like Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton, who would have been the best players on any other team. And it was the first win from Milwaukee in, I think, more than 20 years. And off the court, he's considered to be one of the most beloved players. People find him to be really funny and have a really good personality. And he's seen as sort of the future of the NBA, especially after winning the championship this year, as LeBron James and some of the older players who are pretty famous start to retire. People expect that Giannis will start to become the face of the league informally in the way that LeBron James is. So now I'm going to talk about this most recent season. This most recent season was beset by tons of injuries. Many players were out during the regular season due to the closeness between the bubble season and this season. And there were tons of injuries. I think there was only like a 6 or 7 week break between the bubble season, which was played a lot later, and this season. And as a result of the continuous playing of basketball, a lot of players got injured. And although, LeBron James attributed his loss to the fact that he was playing so much basketball, this decision was ultimately made by the NBA Players Union as well as with the NBA, because it was decided that, a lot of money was going to be lost if they didn't play the regular season. So people decided that was important to them. And I'm mostly going to focus today just very briefly on discussing some of the playoffs, in part because a lot of the teams today are super teams, as I discussed. In general, they don't play in the regular season because they oftentimes want to wait until the playoffs and rest up and make sure that they're in a good position. Also, games weren't played this season in front of fans due to COVID restrictions until the playoffs in May. Nikola Jokic, who you can see in the center, also known as the Joker, became the MVP. You should look up some of his videos on YouTube. They're very cool. You can see he does really interesting passes. And one very exciting thing in the playoffs is that the Knicks made it to the playoffs for the first time in many, many years, as I discussed, which was a very, very big deal for New Yorkers. And in the playoffs, the Bucks were initially, just to give some brief highlights, the Phoenix Suns, who ended up making it to the last round, knocked out LeBron James and the Lakers in the first round, and then proceeded pretty much to coast all the way to the finals. It was a much tougher struggle for the Bucks. They won in the first round. They beat the Heat in the first round, and then were playing against the Nets in the second round. And the Nets, they made it to 7 games. The Nets had 2 injuries during those games where James Harden and Kyrie Irving weren't playing, and Kevin Durant really stepped up. And in the last game, he shot a 3-pointer, which would have made his team either tie or win the game. I can't recall. And his foot was like 1 step out. The point didn't count, and the Bucks won. So the Bucks got really, really close to not winning. And again, then the next round, they were playing against Atlanta Hawks for the Eastern Conference Finals. And Giannis had his injury, like I was discussing. But ultimately, they ended up winning. It was a very, very big deal for people in Milwaukee. The government, the senators and the governors released orders commending them and declaring the day that they had won to be like the official Bucks Day. So it was very exciting for them. And then just to very briefly touch upon the future, there's a lot of questions about what will happen as players like LeBron James start to age out of the NBA. And there is a need to find sort of the new players and the next players that people are going to feel attached to. There's also a lot of questions about what will happen to super teams and how they're going to change the NBA. As I mentioned, a lot of famous players don't necessarily play during the regular season, in part because they want to rest up and people are not really watching those games. So there's a lot of concern that as these super teams become more prevalent, people are going to be more focused on the playoffs and less focused on watching the regular season games, which would not be good for the financial bottom line of the NBA. But regardless of what happens, I can say that I will hopefully be watching, and I will maybe be able to come back and tell you about the future later. All right. That is it.
Thank you so much, Naomi. That was very interesting. So I think we will start with questions from ACQ, right? If you guys have enough bandwidth for this.
Yes. Thank you, Gulshan. Well, hi, Naomi.
Hi.
My name is Bakhtiar, and I'm a head volunteer at the ACQ in American Cornucopia. Well, I have 2 questions at the same time. Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. Well, the first one is, what are the most famous team in the U.S.? I mean, in basketball. And the second one, as far as I know, the basketball is more popular than the football in the U.S., if I'm not mistaken. So is it the same all the country, or there is some part like which is more popular? Maybe, I mean, in which part of the U.S. the basketball is more popular, or is it the same? Thank you for the answer beforehand.
Sure. Those are great questions. In terms of the most famous teams, obviously, it seems that now people are more attached to players, as I was mentioning, like it's a super team, it's period. So people feel much more attached to LeBron James than they might feel to a certain player. In general, the teams that are the most popular are the ones that are in the biggest cities. So something like the Lakers or the Knicks would be the most famous team. I think the Lakers would probably be the most famous team. Or maybe the Golden State Warriors, because also the Bay Area is pretty big and they were successful for many, many years. In terms of the geographic distribution of people who like basketball versus football. Well, first of all, football is, I think, more watched than basketball. Just more people play basketball casually. Of course, some of that is like because it's very difficult to play football casually. You need a lot of equipment and stuff. In general, football is more popular in the southern part of the United States. In the South, high school football is really, really popular. I don't know if anyone's seen the TV show Friday Night Lights, which is a very popular show, but it's all about basketball in Texas and how all these southern small towns football. They get very into football. I would say that basketball is more popular in big cities and more urban areas.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you guys unmute yourself, please?
Okay. Hi, Naomi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? My name is Asluddin. And I want to ask, can anyone who is not tall play basketball? Sorry, in the US.
Yeah. I would say
it's tall enough. Not tall enough.
Yes, you can definitely. I mean, I guess there are two things. You can definitely play basketball. You might find it harder to play professional basketball, although there are some players who are not particularly tall, who are around 6 foot. I guess that is quite tall. But point guards are traditionally a little bit on the shorter side, so around like you could be like below 6 feet. You definitely don't need to be tall to be good, although I will say that if you're above 7 feet, you're much more likely to play in the NBA than someone who is around 6 feet tall. So I'd say you could still be good, but you might not be able to go professional. I don't know.
Okay,
although very tall players have a lot of issues because it's very hard to be 7 feet tall and your body starts to wear down.
All right, got it. Thanks.
Sorry if that wasn't the answer you were looking for.
Hi, Naomi. My name is Azizbek, and I have a question about basketball. And my question is, how long is a basketball game?
So if you look just at the clock, a basketball game is comprised of 4 12-minute quarters. But it ends up taking around 2.5 to 3 hours to play, just because there are a lot of stops and starts. There are a lot of times when people are trying to determine if someone's being fouled. And of course, because it's on TV, there are a lot of commercial breaks. So if you go to a game, it would be around 2 hours. But if you just look at the clock, it's around 48, 50 minutes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Now let's move to, okay, no more questions so far. Let's move to our questions from YouTube. Question from Donald Grant. Hello, Naomi, do you play basketball?
No, I do not play basketball. I just watch basketball. I played volleyball in high school, but basketball is a very difficult sport, and I am not the most athletically gifted. So I leave the basketball to the professionals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And second question, where the first basketball game happened?
The first basketball game happened in Albany, New York, in I think 1892, but it wasn't really professional. It was just people in a YMCA, and they were just trying to see, I think, if the new sport that had been created the year earlier worked. And so that was the first basketball game, although it was obviously very, very different than the basketball you might see on TV or play today.
Thank you. Next question from Vixout. What team is your favorite one?
I like the Knicks because I'm from New York, but as I mentioned, they are always losing and never doing well. And so it's not very good to be a Knicks fan because I don't think that they've been very successful since like the 1970s or 80s. So if you're going to pick a team to follow, I would suggest one that's better than the Knicks.
Okay, thank you. Sanabarak Barba is asking, is there some restrictions about age to play at professional basketball groups?
In the United States, yes. For a number of years, there was a requirement that you had to go to play college for 1 year. Like as I mentioned, Kevin Durant played from in Texas for a year, and so therefore you had to be like graduated from high school and 18 or 19. But a lot of people felt that this was sort of an unfair rule and a way for college athletics to get more people to play the sport. And now I think you just have to have graduated from high school or have like an equivalency exam, and then they generally you could spend like 1 or 2 years playing abroad, or there are now like minor league basketball teams that you could play with. But I think you have to be. I'm not sure exactly what the age restriction is, but there are no people below 18. I think people tend to be a little bit older when they play in the NBA.
And is there like a restriction when you have to quit NBA, like a age restriction? Or you can play?
No, you can play for as long as you're good, but people tend to get pretty bad in their like late 30s and 40s. Like right now we have players who are 36, 30, 37 years old and who are still playing well, but that's not very common. Usually people retired earlier. Obviously now there's a lot of nutrition and science devoted to that sort of stuff. But in general, people have to retire a little bit earlier.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a comment about LeBron James that from White Says Mail. And he says that LeBron James is a controversial figure, recently put a police officer in harm's way. Have you heard about anything like that? Like,
I'm not sure about that incident. But if someone could look into it, I think he discussed something a police officer had done on his public channel. He definitely is to an extent a controversial figure. He's pretty politically active. He talks a lot about police brutality, but it's very mixed. Some people think he's controversial. Some people think that he's great. So I don't know. I'd have to look more into that incident.
Thank you. Okay, looks like we don't have questions from ACQ so far. Right, ACQ? Did I get it right? Yes. All right.
No questions so far.
Okay, thanks. All right, so next question. What is the best age to start playing basketball?
I guess it depends what your goal is. Let's say that you don't want to become a professional basketball player, in which case it's probably good to start at 5 or 6 years old. You can start at any age. I mean, if you go to any American city and you walk around the parks, you will see people of all ages playing basketball up until 60s, 70s, pretty old. And so I would say that any age is a good age to start if it's something you're interested in, and there are always going to be teams and pickup games for you to play with.
Okay. Do people study basketball or have basketball classes in schools? Like in high school, in middle school?
We have physical education classes. And so at least in my school, we would sort of discuss, we would have like different weeks devoted to different sports. And then we would like play them. So we would learn some of the rules about soccer and basketball and other like major sports. I think that was more of a way to get us active and less of a way to teach us about like the specific sports. But of course, it depends on every school. So I can only like speak for myself that we learned a little bit of it in school, but mostly just as a way to get us like active and moving around.
All right, next question. How often do people go to watch basketball games, like live basketball games?
That's a good question. And it of course depends on how serious you are about basketball. There are some people who have season tickets, meaning that they go to every single home game of their favorite team. And then you can also get discounts and then they'll also like travel with the team and you could get discounts for going to see them in other cities. But that's like if you're really a diehard fan where you would go for every single game. I would say most people probably would catch if you're like a more casual. I mean, I watch it on TV, but most people would catch a game in person maybe once or twice a season. Maybe in general, basketball has a lot less people going to the games. I think because the stadiums are a lot smaller than football stadiums. So I don't think it's as prevalent to go watch basketball, but I'm not sure.
When you say home games, can you please explain us what does it mean?
Home games are when games are played in the stadium of the home team. So that means that it would be played, like let's say, you're the Lakers, a home game would be one played at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, and then away games are when you go to the other team's stadiums to play the game.
Thank you. Right, next question. What about female groups who play basketball well? Can you say anything about females in basketball?
So the WNBA, which is the female counterpart to the NBA, was created in 1996, and they have all of the good female players have played there, and there are famous players like I was talking about a couple weeks ago. Diana Taurasi is one. Candace Parker is another one. And I don't know about specific teams. I think in general, the Phoenix Suns is really good. Obviously, just like the NBA, it goes back and forth every single year as to who is good. But one place that's always good is the college team of University of Connecticut. And they are a good team, generally.
Thank you so much. Okay, so unfortunately ACQ says that they cannot hear us well. So sorry, guys. And everyone else who is watching us on YouTube and Facebook, feel free to put your questions in the comment section. Okay, Naomi, if you rate the sports that you like, basketball, like where would be basketball for you?
I really like watching basketball. I would probably say it's my favorite sport to watch. In terms of other sports, I really like to play volleyball. I played it in high school and I really loved that. But I find something about watching basketball to be very relaxing and fun. And it's especially in the later games in the season when there were people back in the stadiums, it was fun to like see that sort of energy, which obviously I hadn't seen in a long time, like a lot of people gathering. And then I also really like to play badminton. obviously pretty informally. We like my family just got sort of a net that we stick in the ground and we will like hit the ball back and forth, nothing or hit the shuttlecock is what it's called, back and forth. Nothing serious, but I really like to play it.
Oh, that's interesting. Cristiano Ronaldo is asking, which team is your favorite?
I think my favorite basketball team is the Knicks, but I sort of watch games from all different teams, and I'm not very picky. I just sort of like to watch basketball, and I find it to be interesting and a nice way to relax.
Thank you. Sana Barak Barwe is asking, what do you think? Could the basketball players play football as well as basketball?
I don't know about professionally, but definitely a lot of athletes that are really good at one sport played another sport or like could have played another sport professionally. For example, LeBron James played football in high school and he was extremely good at it. And also Michael Jordan decided in the middle of his career that he was going to go play baseball and he was good enough to be able to play it at like, I think like a minor league level. And so there definitely are athletes who will focus on, you know, two sports in college and both be really good at and be good at really both of them, which is not good for the rest of us or upsetting for the rest of us who are not particularly talented at sports, that there are some people who can do two sports really well. I don't know about professionally, but definitely there are people who play basketball and football at a high level. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have a basketball court at your university, at Yale University?
Yeah, we have a really, really large gym at Yale University. I think it's like the second biggest college gym or something. And we have huge basketball courts. I've never seen them or been to them. I just know that they exist. And I think also in some of the like residential halls and the dormitories, there's basketball courts in the basement. I think mine has one.
Interesting. We never have that here in Uzbekistan. Is there a basketball team at your school, at your university?
Yes, we have the Yale basketball team. In general, they're pretty good. It depends on the year. In the United States, the big thing in college basketball is to make it to something called like the March Madness, which is like the big championship of all of the college basketball teams. And that's huge. A lot of people will make brackets to try to determine who will go to the next round. It's very common in an American workplace to like have a competition to see who can get the most accurate bracket. And the Yale basketball team has made it to March Madness a couple of times in the last few years.
That's cool. Okay. I become a one of how is attitude for basketball players when they are in public? I think how they treat people, like maybe.
In general, I think that they try to be pretty nice and courteous, although it of course depends. I think basketball players feel a lot of pressure to keep up a certain image in order to get sponsorships and stuff. So they try to be pretty nice. But of course, that's not saying the sort of people that they are when like at their core. But in general, they try to be pretty nice, pretty accommodating of pictures and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. When you say they try to get sponsors, why do they need sponsors?
They don't need sponsors. Like you make enough money in playing basketball generally, but for a player like LeBron James, he can make a lot more money because he's so famous by being in ads for things or being sponsored by different athletic companies. And so and a lot of that is dependent on your public image because the company is, you know, tying their public image to your public image. And so a lot of players will try to get these sponsorships in order to just make more money.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. Thank you so much. American Konakarshi, do you guys have any last minute questions? No? Okay, then let's take a last question from our YouTube viewer, Cristiano Ronaldo. Have you ever met any famous basketball players?
I haven't met any famous basketball players. One of my friends saw Blake Griffin on the street a couple of weeks ago, right after his team lost. But I have not. Maybe now I will, but as of right now, no.
Thank you. All right. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, Naomi, so much. We learned a lot about American basketball. It was very, very interesting. Thank you so much, American Kona Karshi, for joining us. We hope to see you next Friday. Thank you, Naomi.
Bye.
And thank you, everyone, for questions online, our viewers. Great question. See you Friday.
Bye.
Bye.